To understand climate change as a topic, you first have to understand weather versus climate. So, weather is meteorological parameters short term, like today's sunny, windy, etc., whereas climate is meteorology long term, like decades. And from looking at climate data, so over decades, scientists have been able to come up with models that show that climate is indeed changing. Um, and based on these models, in general, we do see a temperature increase, mostly at the poles, but other places. But we also see a change in precipitation. Again, an increase at the poles, but also in places such as the Sahara Desert, which may or may not be a good thing. But we see a decrease in places such as the Amazon rainforest, which is a bad thing for plants and animals. So all of these changes in temperature can be looked at as energy. And we know that if you put energy into something, the molecules speed up and produce heat. And so looking at that energy and temperature change of the Earth, we're really looking at this thing called radiative forcing, which is the change in energy in the atmosphere due to greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse gases are a known thing linked to the topic of climate change. They can be defined as compounds or molecules that absorb infrared. But basically what they are these structures that when they're energized allows them to vibrate, which then speeds them up and creates that heat. And so scientists mainly look at 4 greenhouse gases: carbon, methane, N2O, and ozone. And like I said, these molecules can be energized, and they get their energy from the sun. So when we look at energy from the sun, we see that 50% is absorbed at the surface, 20% is absorbed in the atmosphere, and only 30% is reflected back. So of the total 100% of sunlight coming in, only 30% is being reflected back, which means that more energy is coming into the earth than being let out, creating an overall net positive effect. And these inputs and outputs can be affected by anthropogenic or human activities. So we can change the albedo or the reflectivity of objects based on land development, rural areas, all of that stuff. But also human activities create greenhouse gases. So when I'm thinking of albedo and what's being absorbed and what's being reflective, look at dark colors like streets and trees versus like crops. That's absorbing the heat, whereas things like clouds and plane contrails, that's reflecting the heat. So based on what we're doing in our human activities, we're always going to be messing with that. And then also going back to greenhouse gases, the carbon, methane, N2O, and ozone, those are created and released into the atmosphere via industry, cars, landfills, sewage treatment, agriculture, but they can also be affected due to the ocean, vegetation. So overall, any human activity is going to create change in the climate and create change what's being absorbed, what's being reflected, which then overall changes the climate of the earth. And climate change is not to be confused with global warming, which is a common misconception. It's not completely wrong because the models do show an overall increase in temperature. But when we're thinking climate change, we're thinking that the increase and decrease of precipitation in certain areas, the general overall increase of temperature, but also things such as like hurricanes, fires, any big event like that are still going to happen, and that's looking at the overall change of the earth. So even if we do mitigate and come up with strict regulations on greenhouse gas concentrations, or where can be built, like no matter what, it's still going to create a change in the climate.